Blood drained from David's face as he flipped open the heavy chain-linked leather wallet. Inside sat $12,000 in crisp hundreds and a solid silver death head patch. He hadn't just picked up lost cash on Highway 99. He held the property of a notoriously violent Hells Angels enforcer. Rain hammered the windshield of David Miller's battered 2008 Honda Civic like a barrage of tiny, relentless fists. It was 2:14 a.m. on a desolate, unlit stretch of Route 99, just 30 miles outside of Fresno, California. For the past 6 months, David's life had been reduced to an endless, exhausting loop of rideshare, driving, desperately trying to outrun the crushing avalanche of medical debt. His wife Sarah was lying in a sterile room at Fresno General Hospital, fighting a brutal and aggressive form of acute myeloid leukemia. Her experimental treatments cost $6,000 a month, money David simply didn't have. Bleary-eyed and running on 3 hours of sleep and stale gas station coffee, David almost didn't see the dark mass sitting squarely in the middle of the rain-slicked asphalt. He swerved violently, the Civic's tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second before catching traction. The car skidded onto the muddy shoulder, the hazard lights clicking rhythmically in the pitch-black night. Heart pounding against his ribs, David gripped the steering wheel, exhaling a shaky breath. Thinking he had nearly struck an animal or a piece of blown-out tire tread, he grabbed his cheap LED flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the freezing downpour to check his front bumper for damage. There was no damage to the car, but sitting exactly where his tires had just been was a massive custom-tooled leather wallet secured by a steel chain as thick as a dog leash. David approached it slowly, his boots crunching on the wet gravel. The wallet was soaked, the heavy cowhide dark with rainwater and motor oil. He scooped it up. It weighed a solid 2 pounds. The moment his thumb brushed over the front flap, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter rain shot down his spine. Embossed deeply into the leather was a winged skull wearing a motorcycle helmet, the unmistakable trademarked insignia of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Below it, stamped in gold foil that was peeling at the edges, were the words, Oakland Chapter, 1%er. Taking refuge from the storm, David climbed back into the driver's seat, his hands trembling violently. The windows immediately began to fog up from his ragged breathing. He clicked on the dim overhead dome light and unfastened the heavy brass snap of the wallet. The first thing that hit him was the smell, a potent mixture of stale tobacco gun oil and worn leather. The second thing he saw stopped his heart completely. Cash. Stacks of it. Thick, tightly bound bundles of $100 bills wedged into the expanding pockets. David's mind immediately short-circuited. He pulled the bundles out his thumbs, rapidly flicking through the edges. $10,000, maybe $12,000. More money than he had made in the last 4 months of driving combined. It was exactly enough to cover Sarah's next 2 rounds of treatment. It was salvation, wrapped in cowhide, but salvation came with a name. David pulled a California driver's license from the clear plastic slot. The man staring back from the photo had cold, dead eyes, a thick, braided beard and a jagged scar running from his left ear down into his collar. His name was Jackson Davis, and tucked directly behind the license was a heavy silver medallion, a filthy few patch, a known underworld indicator, worn only by members who had committed severe acts of violence on behalf of the club. David stared at the money. A desperate, dark thought crept into his mind. Out here in the middle of nowhere, who would know he could take the cash, throw the leather wallet into the raging irrigation canal 5 miles down the road, and walk away? Sarah would get her medicine. The hospital wouldn't send them to collections. They could breathe again. He reached to shove the cash into his glove compartment when his phone screen suddenly lit up brightly on the dashboard mount, accompanied by a sharp, piercing chime. An Apple notification glowed violently against the dark cabin. Safety alert. An unknown AirTag has been detected moving with you. The owner can see your location. David's blood ran ice cold. He dropped the money on the passenger seat as if it had burst into flames. He frantically dug his fingers into the deep, Kevlar-lined pockets of the wallet. There, tightly stitched behind a hidden flap of leather, was a small, round bulge. The tracking device. They knew exactly where the wallet was. And worse, they knew it had stopped moving. Panic absolute and blinding consumed him. He threw the Civic into drive, his tires spinning in the mud before catching the pavement. He had to get rid of it. He would drive to the nearest gas station, throw it in the trash, and speed away. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, a pair of intensely bright, closely set halogen headlights appeared over the crest of the highway behind him. They were moving incredibly fast, weaving through the lanes, closing the distance. They're coming for it, David thought, his chest tightening in a full-blown panic attack. If they catch me trying to dump it, they'll think I stole it. They'll kill me on the side of the road, and no one will ever find my body. His hands shaking so hard he could barely grip the wheel, he grabbed the wallet again and searched for anything. A phone number, a business card. Tucked in the very back was a smudged black business card with red lettering, Apex Metals and Recovery. Ask for Thomas. A local Fresno phone number was printed below. David grabbed his phone, dialed the number, and hit speakerphone. It rang 4 times. Every second felt like an hour. The headlights in his mirror were less than a quarter mile away, now roaring with the deafening sound of a V-twin engine. Yeah, a voice growled on the other end of the line. It was deep, gravelly, and entirely unwelcoming. I found something, David stammered, his voice cracking. On Route 99. A wallet. It belongs to Jackson Davis. Silence on the line. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping against concrete. Where are you right now? The voice demanded, the tone dropping an octave. I'm driving south on 99, passing the Madera exit. David lied, hoping to buy himself time if the bike behind him was the owner. I just want to give it back. I haven't touched anything. All the money is there, I swear. Listen to me very carefully, the voice said, cold and methodical. Take exit 142. Go east for 3 miles until you hit the industrial park. Look for the rusted water tower. Turn right into the gates. You have exactly 12 minutes to get there. If that tracker goes anywhere else, or if you call the cops, there isn't a hole deep enough for you to hide in. You understand? I understand, David whispered. The line went dead. David looked in his rearview mirror. The motorcycle that had been tailing him suddenly downshifted the engine, screaming as it blew past David's car at over 100 miles an hour, spraying his windshield with blinding water. It wasn't them. Not yet. Swallowing the lump of pure terror in his throat, David took the exit. He was driving straight into the Devil's Den. The industrial park was a sprawling wasteland of decaying warehouses, rusted shipping containers, and cracked concrete. The storm had knocked out the streetlights, leaving the area bathed in eerie, shifting shadows. Lightning flashed, illuminating the skeletal frame of a massive rusted water tower, looming against the angry sky. David's Civic slowly rolled down the flooded access road. Ahead, a pair of towering chain-link gates, topped with coiled razor wire, stood slightly ajar. A faded sign hung by one hinge, Apex Metals. As David pulled his car through the gates, blinding floodlights suddenly snapped on, bathing his vehicle in an interrogator's glare. He threw his hand up to shield his eyes, slamming on the brakes. The heavy gates slammed shut behind him with a terrifying metallic clang. He was locked in. Through the blinding light, figures began to emerge from the rain. 4 massive men wearing dark leather cuts over heavy hoodies stepped in front of the car. Water poured off their shoulders. None of them looked happy. One of them, a man with a thick red beard and a crowbar resting casually over his shoulder, pointed a thick finger at David and motioned for him to roll down the window. David pressed the button, his hand shaking so violently he almost couldn't find it. The freezing wind howled into the cabin. "Turn off the engine. Put the keys on the roof. Step out with your hands empty," the bearded man barked. David did exactly as he was told. He grabbed the wallet from the passenger seat, stepped out into the ankle-deep puddles, and placed his keys on the wet roof of the Honda. He stood trembling in the rain, clutching the heavy leather wallet against his chest like a shield. "Inside," the man ordered, gesturing toward a massive corrugated steel warehouse. David was marched through a heavy steel side door. The interior was a cavernous chop shop. The air was thick with the smell of ozone from a welding torch, raw gasoline, and stale beer. 6 customized Harley-Davidsons sat on hydraulic lifts. Around a large poker table in the center of the room sat 8 more patched members of the Hells Angels. The moment David walked in, all conversation stopped. The silence that fell over the room was heavier than the storm outside. From the shadows near the back office, a giant of a man stepped forward. It was the man from the ID Jackson Davis. In person, Jackson was even more terrifying. He stood 6'4", built like a brick wall, wearing heavy steel-toed boots and a leather vest adorned with enough patches to signify a lifetime of violence. The jagged scar on his face pulled his left eye into a permanent, menacing squint. Jackson walked slowly toward David, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete. He stopped mere inches away, towering over the exhausted, terrified rideshare driver. "You're the one who called Bones," Jackson said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated in David's chest. Yes," David stuttered, holding out the wallet. "I found it on the highway. I didn't take anything, I swear to God." Jackson snatched the wallet from David's hands. He didn't say a word. He walked over to a metal workbench, turned on an overhead shop light, and began pulling out the contents. He meticulously counted the bundles of cash, his thick, calloused thumbs moving with surprising speed. David held his breath, praying he hadn't accidentally dropped a bill in the car. If the count was short by even $1, he knew he wasn't leaving this warehouse alive. 12 grand, it's all here," Jackson said over his shoulder. The tension in the room seemed to drop a fraction of a degree. The other bikers relaxed slightly, a few returning to their beers. Jackson then dug his fingers into the secret compartment where the air tag was housed. He pulled out the tracking device, verifying it was untouched. But as he reached deeper into the pocket, his expression suddenly shifted. The casual, intimidating confidence vanished, replaced by an expression of profound confusion, and then a terrifying, simmering rage. Jackson slowly pulled out a small, folded piece of thick, glossy paper. David squinted. He hadn't seen that in the car. He had only checked the cash and the ID. Jackson unfolded the paper under the harsh shop light. It was a Polaroid photograph, but its edges were stained with dark, dried, rust-colored spots. Blood. Jackson's breathing became heavy. He turned around his eyes, locking onto David with a gaze so lethal it made David's knees weak. The giant biker marched back across the room, closing the distance in 3 massive strides. He slammed his hand against David's throat, pinning him violently against the steel wall of the warehouse. David gagged his hands, flying up to grip Jackson's massive forearm, but trying to move the biker was like trying to move a redwood tree. "Where the hell did you get this?" Jackson roared, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. The other bikers instantly stood up, hands dropping to their waistbands, the atmosphere in the room turning explosive in a millisecond. "I didn't," David choked out, struggling for air. I didn't open that pocket. I only saw the cash and the ID, I swear." Jackson shoved the Polaroid directly into David's face. "Look at it." David forced his eyes to focus. It was a picture of a blonde woman bound to a wooden chair in what looked like a damp concrete basement. She was bruised, terrified, staring into the camera lens. The blood on the photo was fresh enough that it had smeared onto Jackson's thumb. "I don't know her. I swear I've never seen her." David gasped, his vision starting to spot with black dots from the pressure on his windpipe. Jackson released him. David collapsed to the concrete, coughing violently and clutching his throat. "That's my little sister, Elena." Jackson whispered the rage in his voice, now mixed with a terrifying, hollow dread. "She disappeared from her apartment in Sacramento 3 days ago." David looked up, wheezing. "I found the wallet on the road, exactly the way I gave it to you." Jackson stared at the photo, his chest heaving. "I lost this wallet 4 hours ago during a brawl outside a bar in Modesto. Someone lifted it off me in the chaos, and whoever took it didn't want the $12,000. Jackson slowly turned his gaze back to David, realization dawning in his cold eyes. "They planted the tracker so they could monitor who found it. They planted the photo to send me a message." Jackson said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. He looked down at David, no longer seeing a victim, but a vital piece of a deadly puzzle. "Whoever dropped this wallet back on the highway wanted me to find it, but you found it first." Jackson reached down, grabbed David by the collar of his damp jacket, and hauled him effortlessly to his feet. "You're not going back to your car, Miller," Jackson said, turning to his men. "Lock the gates. Kill the lights. Arm up." The insane truth hit David like a freight train. He hadn't just returned a Hells Angels wallet. He had unwittingly intercepted a ransom drop from a rival cartel, and now the most dangerous men in California needed him to retrace his exact steps, or Jackson's sister was going to die. Sweat stung David's eyes as the terrifying reality of Jackson's order washed over him. He wasn't leaving. He was being conscripted into a lethal underworld war. The massive warehouse buzzed with sudden, terrifying energy as bikers racked shotguns and loaded heavy-caliber pistols. "I can't be part of this," David pleaded, his voice cracking as he backed away from the towering enforcer. "My wife is at Fresno General. She has leukemia. If I don't go back, she has nobody. Please take your money, take the tracker, just let me walk." Jackson paused, his cold eyes scanning David's panicked face. He didn't see deception. He saw a broken, desperate man. But empathy was a luxury Jackson couldn't afford while his sister's life was on a ticking clock. "Nobody is walking away," Jackson rumbled, racking the slide of a black 1911 pistol. "Whoever took my sister dropped that wallet to lure me into an ambush. They know I'd tear the state apart looking for it. They wanted me to track it to their kill zone. But you ruined their timeline. They don't know you have it, which means we have a window." Bones, the massive biker with the red beard, stepped up, wiping grease from his hands. "Boss, if we roll out on the bikes, they'll hear us coming from 2 miles away. It's a suicide run if we don't know exactly who we're hitting or where the drop was supposed to be." David's mind raced. He needed to be useful, or he was dead. Suddenly a memory flashed through his panic-stricken brain. "My car!" David blurted out, pointing frantically toward the rain-swept courtyard. "I drive for a ride-share app. I have a 4K dash cam mounted behind the rearview mirror. It records everything in a wide angle, even in the dark. It might have caught whoever dropped the wallet." Jackson's eyes narrowed. He grabbed David by the shoulder, propelling him toward the steel side door. "Get the camera." 3 minutes later, they were huddled around a grease-stained laptop on a metal workbench. Bones inserted the micro SD card, rapidly clicking through the video files until he found the timestamp, 2:10 a.m. On the screen, David's Honda Civic was driving through the relentless downpour along Route 99. The video was silent, but the tension in the garage was deafening. "There!" Jackson barked, pointing a thick, scarred finger at the screen. "Slow it down, frame by frame." Bones tapped the keyboard. A dark, heavily modified Chevy Tahoe, running without headlights, sped past David's Civic in the left lane. As the Tahoe cut in front of the Honda, the passenger side window rolled down just enough for a heavily tattooed arm to toss a dark, heavy object onto the wet asphalt. "Pause it and enhance the bumper," Jackson ordered, leaning so close to the screen his breath fogged the glass. Bones zoomed in on the rear of the Tahoe. The license plate was covered in mud, but the reflection of David's headlights caught a very specific metallic bumper sticker, a silver trident intersecting a skull. A collective growl rippled through the bikers behind David. "Donovan Reed!" Jackson whispered his voice, dripping with absolute venom. "The Irish syndicate out of Oildale." Donovan Reed was a ruthless local crime boss who had been violently encroaching on the Hells Angels weapons smuggling routes. Reed taking Jackson's sister wasn't just leverage, it was an act of war. "We know where Reed operates," Bones said, slamming the laptop shut. "That abandoned lumber mill on the edge of the county line. He uses the underground drying kilns for interrogations. If we roll up in a pack, Reed's spotters will light us up before we even breach the perimeter," Tommy, a younger patched member, pointed out. "And if they know we're coming, they'll kill her." Jackson slowly turned his head, his gaze falling directly onto David. Then he looked out the window at the battered, unassuming 2008 Honda Civic sitting in the rain. "They won't hear us coming," Jackson said, a dangerous tactical calm settling over him. "Because we aren't taking the bikes." Rain continued to batter the roof of the Civic as David drove in terrified silence. The cramped interior of his compact car was completely swallowed by the sheer mass of Jackson Davis in the passenger seat and Bones in the back. Both men were armed to the teeth, dressed in dark tactical gear over their cuts. Following Jackson's instructions, Tommy had taken the AirTag from the wallet, taped it to a stray dog roaming the industrial park, and let the animal wander off into the city. Reed's tech guy would be tracking a chaotic, nonsensical path, buying them the element of complete surprise. "Turn off your headlights," Jackson commanded, as they approached a rusted chain-link fence, barely visible through the thick pine trees. "Roll it in neutral down the dirt path." David killed the lights and shifted the car into neutral. The Civic glided silently through the mud, slipping past the perimeter of the decaying lumber mill like a ghost. There were no roaring V-twin engines to give them away. To the heavily armed guards stationed on the loading docks, the darkness remained completely undisturbed. "Stop here," Jackson whispered. "Keep the engine running. If we don't come back in 10 minutes, drive away and never speak of this night to anyone. Understand?" David nodded violently, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Jackson and Bones slipped out of the car, melting into the shadows and the driving rain. For 7 agonizing minutes, David sat in the dark, the rhythmic squeak of his windshield wipers the only sound keeping him tethered to reality. He prayed for Sarah. He prayed he would see her again. Then the silence shattered. A muffled explosion shook the ground, vibrating through the floorboards of the Civic. It was followed by a ferocious staccato of automatic gunfire that lit up the interior of the lumber mill in rapid, strobe-like flashes. Shouting echoed through the trees, masked by the roaring storm. David panicked. He threw his hand onto the gear shift, ready to slam it into drive and flee. But just as he looked toward the access road, a massive figure burst through the mill's side door. It was Jackson. His face was smeared with soot and blood, but he was alive, In his massive arms he carried a young woman wrapped in a heavy tactical jacket. She was conscious, crying and clutching his neck tightly. Bones covered their retreat, firing 2 deafening blasts from a tactical shotgun into the doorway before sprinting toward the car. "Open the doors!" Bones roared. David scrambled, unlocking the back doors. Jackson gently shoved his sister into the back seat, followed closely by Bones. "Go floor it," Jackson bellowed, diving into the passenger seat and slamming the door. David didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into drive, stomped on the gas pedal, and the Civic tore out of the mud, fishtailing violently before finding traction on the main road. Behind them, men poured out of the mill raising rifles, but they were too late. The unassuming ride-share car vanished into the stormy night, leaving the chaos far behind. An hour later, David pulled the car to a stop under the flickering neon lights of a deserted gas station, 10 miles away from the Hells Angels warehouse. The silence in the car was heavy, but the tension had broken. Jackson's sister was safe, currently being tended to by a club doctor, back at a secondary safe house. Jackson unbuckled his seatbelt. He turned to look at David, who was slumped against the driver's side window, absolutely drained of all adrenaline and emotion. While David had been driving, Jackson's eyes had wandered across the cluttered dashboard. Tucked behind the air vent was a crumpled piece of paper. It was a final notice from Fresno General Hospital Oncology Department. Patient Sarah Miller. Balance due. $32,450. Jackson reached out and pulled the paper from the dash. He stared at the terrifying number for a long moment, the violent enforcer suddenly remarkably still. "You risked your life tonight," Jackson said, his deep voice softer than David had ever heard it. "You could have run. You could have dumped my wallet in a ditch. But you didn't." "I just wanted to do the right thing," David whispered exhaustedly, staring out at the rain. "I just wanted to go back to my wife." Jackson reached into his heavy leather jacket. He pulled out the massive chain-linked wallet. He opened it, taking out the $12,000 in crisp hundreds. But he didn't stop there. He unzipped a black canvas duffel bag he had carried out of the lumber mill, a bag he had liberated from Donovan Reed's private office vault. Jackson reached into the bag and pulled out 4 thick, vacuum-sealed bricks of cash. He dropped them onto David's lap. David stared at the money, completely paralyzed. It had to be over $100,000. "The club pays its debts, Miller," Jackson said, opening the passenger door and stepping out into the cold night air, where a pair of headlights from his crew's backup vehicle were already pulling in to pick him up. "Take care of Sarah, and buy yourself a better car." Jackson slammed the door shut. David sat alone in the quiet hum of his Honda Civic, surrounded by a mountain of syndicate cash, the storm finally breaking as the first light of dawn cracked over the California highway. He had driven into a nightmare, and miraculously he had driven out with Sarah's cure. If this insane, true story of luck, danger, and karma kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a crazy plot twist, and hit subscribe so you never miss out on more unbelievable underworld stories. What would you have done if you found that wallet on a dark highway? Let us know in the comments below.